19 drones flying into Polish airspace. It's quite a big one. And of course, yesterday, the attack on Qatar is extraordinary. This is America's closest ally in the Gulf.
Yeah, his friends have turned into quite a problem for him. Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu, but also, and we'll come to this, Jeffrey Epstein.
Hello and welcome to a brand new Channel 4 News podcast.
This is TrumpWorld. I'm Anushka Asthana.
And I'm Matt Frei. And we'll be rekindling a relationship, a special relationship. This one is between us across the ocean because Anushka's in Washington and I'm in London, or wherever else I might be traveling, or wherever else you might be traveling in the big old United States.
Yeah, I am the new US editor for Channel 4 News. I haven't been here very long, although it already feels like it. I think just a week and a half doing this job. And in that time, Matt, I've had to write down the amount of things that have happened. You ready for this?
Go on.
Deep breath. He's about to be drawn into the Russia drone incursions into Poland that was shot down overnight. He denied giving a green light to Israel to strike Hamas negotiators in Doha. He made his Department of Defense into a Department of War. He denied writing and signing a lewd message in sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday book, one that we then saw because the House released the book for all of us. And I mustn't forget, for part of the week, millions of TikTokers thought he was dead. Spoiler alert, he was not.
And he wasn't doing all these things from the grave, from the dark side. He was doing them in the White House, sitting in that wonderful desk, the Resolute desk, with the very resolute interior design that's changed dramatically to make the White House look more and more like Mar-a-Lago. Now, listen, joking aside, we woke up this morning, and I guess it happened in the middle of the night while you were sleeping in Washington, to some rather dramatic news that 19 Russian drones had made an incursion into Polish airspace and were shot down by a combination of Dutch and Polish fighter jets, with Italian early warning AWACS systems flying overhead, giving them guidance. I mean, this is the most serious clash, really, between NATO and Russia since the beginning of the Ukrainian war, the full-scale war in 2022, and arguably, actually, really since 1945, except the Russians, interestingly enough, Anushka, are not saying it was deliberate. This wasn't even mentioned on the early morning news on Channel 1, apparently, and then it finally crept into the running order. But what will Trump say when he wakes up?
Well, he's definitely going to be asked about both this and about Qatar. I mean, he will be furious about this. He had this idea, didn't he, that Vladimir Putin was someone he got on with, someone he could speak to, someone, as you know, because you were there, he invited to Alaska. And I feel like there's this sense that as strong men, they can talk to each other and they can sort this out. And so the reality of what he described as a positive meeting in Alaska, although we know that it was obviously cut short, was Vladimir's going to listen to me. And just the very fact that he went away, that some of the attacks on Ukraine started to intensify, was already irritating President Trump. The very difficult situation now is that it requires a NATO response, although at the moment, obviously, that is an Article 4 response they're talking about, which is the need to consult. And there's no reason why America wouldn't say yes to that rather than the Article 5 response, which is to see it as an attack on all. But I actually saw this just as I was going to bed, and I felt like following Israel striking Qatar, the world feels like a pretty scary place.
I think it does. And I think there are really two key points here for Trump. Is that on one hand, as you said, he loves the idea that he doesn't need briefing notes. He doesn't need people, aides on either side or Sherpas who help him and guide him during these high-level talks. It's the power of his charisma, of his charm, yes, charm, he thinks, of his clout, to basically bend the will of strongmen like Putin or Benjamin Netanyahu. And really the theme of the summer for me has been, and I was in Alaska a few weeks ago watching Putin and Trump on the red carpet, the theme has been, Trump taken as a fool by these powerful men with impunity. And let's see whether that survives the day, because he'll have to do something. He knows that he's been taken a fool. And I know when I interviewed him years ago in 2013, I could tell that it was very easy to scratch him. If you kind of mock him or even have a hint of laughter at him, he lashes out at you. And he called me stupid several times in the interview. And then I talked to Steve Bannon, his former chief strategist, a few years later. And he said the one thing Trump absolutely hates is to be taken for a ride, or, taken as a fool, or to be cut out of any deals where he might be making lots of money and isn't. And I really think what we're seeing with Netanyahu and Putin is that they are taking him for a fool. I mean, the attack on Qatar is extraordinary. This is America's closest ally, if you like, in the Gulf. America's biggest military airbase in the Middle East is in Qatar. The Qataris have bought $60 billion worth of military equipment, including Patriot missiles, and they weren't told about this until the thing was actually underway.
I mean, it is pretty extraordinary. When the news came in that there'd been strikes on Qatar, I spoke to a person I know who has been very senior in the military and immediately was like, would this have happened without the US knowing? And they basically said it would have been totally extraordinary for that to happen without the US knowing, unless Israel had gone completely rogue. And obviously, when America started to talk about it, they did say we were notified. But when you look into the details, I mean, barely notified. It seems like, certainly from reports, that the US military noticed Israeli jets going in a certain direction, asked the question, and that by the time Donald Trump was informed and he got, his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, to warn the Qataris about it, it was too late. And they were furious. I mean, I was watching Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, yesterday talking about this. He wants Qatar to be a friend. I mean, you've mentioned the dealings with them. Don't forget the, $400 million plane that they gifted him, somewhat controversially. They've obviously had a key role in peace talks. So absolute fury. But then he didn't quite dress down Netanyahu. They were very much like, but Hamas has to be dealt with. I really would love to be a fly on the wall in how angry he was behind the scenes.
I don't understand why Trump is giving Netanyahu all this long reign, because they've had beef in the past. I mean, Trump was furious with Netanyahu when Netanyahu congratulated President Biden on his victory in 2020. He was the second person to ring up, I think. And Trump was absolutely livid. How can you possibly, congratulate, the man who stole the election from me? They've had disagreements in the past. And this also came to the fore even after October the 7th. Trump was going to come over to Israel when I was based there for a couple of months many times, and he always canceled the trip. And it wasn't because for security reasons. It's just that we were told by sources at the time that they weren't getting on well enough to ensure that it would be a successful trip for Trump. But the other thing, Anushka, and again, I find this baffling, is why not intervene if you're Donald Trump to stop the Israelis from doing this ever again? Because you're in danger of losing one of the biggest achievements of your first term, which were the Abraham Accords, peace between Israel and the UAE, who yesterday called the attack grotesque, barbaric, and Bahrain, which more or less used the same kind of language. The whole shtick of Trump in the Middle East is to try and have a sort of comprehensive peace agreement with the Israelis and the Saudis at the heart of it. Well, that ain't going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, the risk, obviously, the pressure is massively on both of them to pull out of the Abraham Accords. And I don't doubt that they are completely furious about it. I think the issue with Donald Trump, and I think we saw this actually before the election, is because he sees everything through this prism of the strong men who can be friends, that he sort of simplifies what actually has to happen. Well, and I think that's the case in both of these situations. I mean, that is like exaggeration, I guess, but understatement. I got it the wrong way around. I'm going to end up the Ukraine-Russia war in a day just by talking to my mate, Vladimir. And, you must have felt this when you were in Alaska. It was as if, Vladimir Putin can just say in a meeting, I'll agree to security guarantees. And Trump takes that and flies with it without any sort of sense of what that actually looks like and whether Russia would really agree to it. And again, in this case, the idea that, I think they were saying in the briefing, Netanyahu told Trump he wanted peace, but without any sort of sense of what a peace deal might actually look like. But yeah, I think that came as close to fury as we've seen. And I noticed that the Prime Minister's office in Israel put out it was us alone. It wasn't us with the US statement, probably in response to some
But even that isn't great, is it? Because they're saying it was us alone. We acted independently without consulting our American allies sufficiently. I mean, it makes them look in a terrible light. I also wonder to what extent Trump is paying with these extraordinary actions, both from the Russians and from the Israelis, is paying for his own slightly ambiguous, kind of woolly, touchy-feely, let's have a chat by the golf green approach to geopolitics. Because if you send out all this positive stuff, these positive vibes, if Steve Witkoff, your main guy, your envoy to everywhere, is in Moscow, more or less kissing the feet of Vladimir Putin and being incredibly thankful for the incredible portrait that Putin's court painters had painted of Trump during his assassination attempt, then of course even Putin is kind of thinking, okay, maybe I can just get away with stuff here. Let's try this on. And the same thing with Netanyahu. If Netanyahu is constantly being told by the American ambassador in Israel, Mike Huckabee, who is very, very right-wing, evangelical, born-again Christian, who doesn't even talk about the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. He talks about, Judea and Samaria. I mean, if this is the message you're getting, you're going to think, well, maybe I can try this on. And Trump has been very bad because of the way he governs, of holding the line, a red line, if there is one at all, because red is always mushy pink with him. And of course, people tread over those lines just to test the territory. And that's a very dangerous place to be in.
It's a very dangerous place, and that's how certainly we're feeling this morning. But I also think that the flip side of that, the argument they would make is that when he comes down on them, he comes down in a way that they will listen more so than they may have listened to previous presidents. As yet, we are not seeing signs of that, but have both of them crossed a line one day after another that Donald Trump simply can't, wash away. I mean, it's very notable that NATO chiefs, when they came here, and actually I ended up starting on air a little bit earlier than planned because of that day when Zelensky was here and all his European babysitters came with him, were one by one, and it is cringeworthy to watch, isn't it? Kind of bowing down to Donald Trump and how brilliant he was and how he was a peacemaker, including our own Prime Minister. Only Friedrich Merz from Germany, I thought, actually stood up to him a tiny bit by saying, I do think we need a ceasefire before we actually...
That's because that's because he's 2 inches taller than him. Maybe that makes it easier. Trump does apparently take that very seriously, physical life. I was going to ask you,
But what
Anushka,
I'm saying is, but these guys are now really, really upset because this is encroaching right into not only NATO territory, but obviously right into European territory. And, we talk about NATO, actually, we talk about Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. What one person was saying to me was, what's in the European Union Charter? What combines the European Union is in some way stronger than Article 5, because Article 5 doesn't actually say what the response needs to be. And the assistance that comes with the EU has to come from all countries immediately. And of course, we're going to have to get a really strong response from the EU today.
The other interesting thing was that yesterday, Donald Trump, or maybe it was in the middle of the night, the time zones are fuzzy, aren't they? When you're talking across oceans, Trump said he wanted, or he demanded, that if Russia continues its aerial bombardments, and remember, since the red carpet schmooze in Alaska, they've sent unprecedented amounts of drones and missiles into Ukrainian cities, killing many, many more people than they killed even at the very beginning of the war. But anyway, Trump's response to this was, you Europeans need to impose 100% secondary sanctions on India and China for buying Russian oil, which they're doing in huge quantities. I mean, the Europeans, I talked to, several senior European diplomats yesterday, and they were aghast. They thought, hang on a minute, you're telling us, and yes, we have been quite naughty when it comes to buying Russian stuff through the back door. You're telling us to impose sanctions on China and India, while you haven't even imposed your own tariffs on China because you're in the middle of a deal and they've got you by the short and curlies over rare earth metals. So Trump is using Europe as a sort of battering ram, when actually the easiest thing for him to do now to bring the Russians to heel to some extent would be to say, dear Ukraine, what did you want again? Where was that laundry list? It's all yours. Have it now.
The difficulty, though, is that his base don't want that. And so that is the situation he is in. They want no more, there's kind of 3 strands to what they want. One of them around immigration, one of them around trade and closed trade. But the big one that they definitely don't want, what they see as American intervention in forever wars.
Well, if you send the Ukrainians kit, if you send them, Patriot missiles, more Patriot missiles, long-range missiles, and if you tell that bloke at the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, to actually allow those missiles to be used as they're intended to be used for long-range targets inside Russia, that was a debate a few weeks ago when Hegseth basically decided to turn that switch off, then I think even the MAGA base, which and this will be our next topic, Epstein, is more interested in Epstein at the moment than perhaps anything else, they'll let that go, because I think even the MAGA base, although they don't want America to be involved in forever wars and certainly don't want to see American boots on the ground anywhere, east of Mississippi, they don't like the idea of their big guy, the guy with the big red hat, being made a fool of by Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Narendra Modi, let alone Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's the territory we're in at the moment.
Yeah, just on Narendra Modi, I find it completely extraordinary the way that Trump seems to have almost pushed him into the arms of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I mean, we all saw those kind of amazing pictures of him. And I should say, Indian men hold people's hands. It's a thing. I say this as an Indian, but nevertheless, the scene of Modi holding Putin's hand was sort of extraordinary. And there was this sense, I think, among quite senior officials here and all over the world, that Donald Trump is to some extent responsible to that, because these are extraordinary tariffs on India, a country where they thought there was going to have this great relationship. I noticed yesterday he's still describing Modi as his great friend. And the thing that the diplomats here try and take away from it is that apparently Modi said at the summit that we want peace in Ukraine and Russia. But yeah, it feels like Donald Trump has led to a lot of that.
So the other really big thing, and I know you've been dealing with this a lot this week, is Epstein, the famous birthday book, 238 pages from 2003. Tell us about it.
Well, this is another issue with a friend of, or perceived friend of, Donald Trump, because many years ago, he and Jeffrey Epstein were extremely close. They fell out, I think, over a property deal. And for his 50th birthday in 2003, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is obviously Jeffrey Epstein's, or was his best friend, and she's obviously serving a sentence now as well, a very long sentence, made this book for him. And the Wall Street Journal, which, by the way, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, is owned by Rupert Murdoch, said that they had seen or been told about within it a picture that Donald Trump had drawn of the outline of a woman's body with a slightly bizarre kind of imagined conversation between Donald and Jeffrey. And then with Donald Trump having scrawled his signature in the area, I don't even want to say, his unmistakable chin there. And then he threatened to sue them for $10 billion. And then the House Oversight Committee this week published the whole book, which is, it is just jaw-dropping. I mean, the pictures there, the White House still say it's very clearly not his signature. The American media, as you can imagine, yesterday was scrutinizing it. Lots of signatures from the time up against this one. It looked very, very similar. But there's also unbelievable other stuff in there. There was loads of kind of sexual content, really highly sexualized. There was pictures of him giving out things to little girls. There were really horrible notes. I mean, the Bill Clinton one's really interesting, because the reason that his base, the MAGA base, are obsessed about Epstein is they thought this was going to lift the lid on a huge conspiracy that was going to engulf Democrats. And obviously the friendship with Bill Clinton was one of them. Difficulty for them. It turned out he was also very close to their man, Donald Trump.
The thing that really struck me about, and I haven't read the whole book, but I have looked at some of the stuff, some of the excerpts, which are now in the public domain, is that throughout the ickiness, and the affection for Epstein, from lots of people, from really the kind of top echelon of American society, whether it's, Silicon Valley billionaires, hedge fund billionaires, former president, as in Bill Clinton. And of course, one of the other names in the book is the name of Lord Peter Mandelson, who was a member of parliament at the time when he wrote in the book in 2003, but is now our ambassador in Washington and considers himself a Trump whisperer, has good relationships with the administration, and is really a key part of Keir Starmer's, foreign policy charm offensive on the United States in these rather mercurial times. In this book, there's a long handwritten letter from Peter Mandelson, which includes references like, my best pal, Jeffrey Epstein. It has, it signs off on, "We love you, Jeffrey." There are some photographs, including one of Peter Mandelson wearing a dressing gown, talking to Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Mandelson has said in an interview that he deeply, profoundly regrets his friendship with Epstein at that stage, which is the early noughties, if he had known later what he knew later, of course, none of this would have happened. He wouldn't have written in the book. And, he calls it an albatross around his neck. So, he's deeply ashamed by this, also he says, but this is something that I think, he will have to probably deal with for some time to come.
But at the moment, the Prime Minister is giving him his full backing.
Indeed.
And saying, well, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, was out basically saying people shouldn't be punished by association. But obviously, it's a huge question over judgment. Also,
just to make this point, I mean, Donald Trump kept saying, the entry into the birthday book is a lie. It's a lie. And it's on the basis of this supposed lie that he took the Wall Street Journal or wants to sue them for $10 billion US. But Mandelson never said it was a lie. None of the other people mentioned in the book have not said it's a lie. They're just embarrassed by it. That puts Donald Trump, who may still be maintaining that it's a lie, into a rather awkward position. And the really interesting thing is that this book is in the public domain, not just because Democrats on Capitol Hill, who've been pretty toothless with Donald Trump, want to weaponize it against the president they so hate, but Republicans voted with Democrats in order to put the book in the public domain in the Oversight Committee. Because the Republican base, the MAGA base, although they love Trump, they really care about Epstein. And they were burning their MAGA hats a few weeks ago when he said, there's nothing to see here. We're not going to reveal these files. And there's a vote coming up in Congress, I think in a couple of weeks' time, that will be about whether all of the contents of the Epstein estate and all the files that Congress has access to will be released. Now, that'll be an interesting vote to see whether Trump still can command the loyalty of the party that is really there in his name.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we've got a situation, and I was at a big press conference last week where we heard from loads and loads of victims. And we've got a situation where 4 House Republicans are going to vote with the Democrats on pushing for this to be released, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is as MAGA as they come. They need 6. And, I describe this place quite often as the court of Donald Trump. Everyone's scared of him. They want to stand in line. So the big question will be whether or
You're
not
not scared.
I'm not scared.
You're not scared of anything.
Donald Trump.
You're fearless. Exactly.
I'm fearless. But whether another 2 Republicans will vote with them. And you know what Trump says? Because the problem he has is that he once said, I'll release the documents. I mean, it was a bit caveated, but he said it. And one suggestion from critics is that as soon as he saw how much he was in them, that's why he doesn't want to release them. He's calling it a total hoax, that it's not true. He says we've released 30,000 documents. But the 30,000 documents, as our colleagues have been reporting at Channel 4 News, are completely dwarfed by the millions and millions and millions of documents that are actually out there. The question is, will it ever actually happen? Will they ever come out?
Of course, a large part of the MAGA base is conspiracy theories and, the QAnon bonkers stuff about the pedophile ring and the pizzeria in Washington, D.C., not far from where you live and where I actually celebrated some of my kids' birthday parties. Comet Pizza, I don't know what it's called now.
Comet Ping Pong.
Comet Ping Pong. Well, Anyway, it's all, this is crazy stuff. But if you're a crazy that believes in QAnon, then suddenly the conspiracy that emerges from, Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book and all the other stuff we know about him and the involvement of, America's most successful bank, JP Morgan, that indulged him for years, basically because he brought in the clients and he brought in the money. All that stuff doesn't seem so bonkers anymore to many people. So I think Trump really needs to watch that. And by the way, you mentioned our dear friend Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman from Colorado. I mean, she's got a mouth on her and she really hates British journalists and, has had a go at, not at me personally, and I hope you never get her, the wrath of Marjorie, but at our friends. And it's quite something to behold. The special relationship dies on her lips. But she has been very, very vocal recently about talking about Gaza and how it's what the Israelis are doing, I quote, genocide. And she thinks that Trump should be much tougher. So we like to think of the MAGA base as uniform as one of those silly red hats that they all wear. But actually, there are lots of different segments and sort of subsects within this big movement. And Trump's got to watch it.
Yeah, some of them are quite difficult for him, particularly on those 3 areas I mentioned: foreign intervention, trade. They love the tariffs. But if the tariffs start affecting the economy very, very badly,
which they are doing, by the way,
a legal case right now suggests that he can't carry on with them, that could become problematic. And then an issue that we are going to come back to, no doubt, not today, but along the line, which is immigration.
Well, as I've said before, it's everything, everywhere, all at once in Trump world. And I hope you've survived this week's news roller coaster without feeling too queasy.
Next week, I will actually be coming to see you, Matt. We'll be in one place because I'm coming to the UK when Donald Trump does for the state visit. But before that, if you have any burning questions or comments that you would like to get to us, then you can email us on trumpworld@channel4.com or leave us a message on YouTube or Spotify, and we'll see if we can get to answer it.
See you next week.
See you next week.